Hi, I am Aurel Enriquez, and this presentation contains our discussion on the urinary system. Browsing through the contents of this chapter, I saw that most of this madi-discuss nyo po ulit when you get to your AUBF classes. So this is one of your third year subjects. Its full name is the Analysis of Urine and Body Fluids. So for the purposes of this discussion, no, iisihan lang po muna natin, no, literal na basics lang muna para iwas information overload. Alright, so ayun po. This discussion is basically an introduction to AUBF. The urinary system is the major excretory system of the body. Now, if you would remember from our previous discussions, other organ systems in the body also have the capability to eliminate waste, like the digestive system, di ba po? The digestive system could eliminate undigested food items through defecation. The skin, the integumentary system, di ba po, could also eliminate cellular waste or small amounts of ions through sweating. The respiratory system is also capable of getting rid of carbon dioxide, which is basically a waste product of ATP production. Pero ang urinary system pa rin po ang main character natin pagdating sa usapan ng waste elimination. And why is that? As it says here, there are other organ systems or these other organ systems, no, they can't compensate if ever the kidney fails. So kung magkakaproblema daw po yung kidneys ng pasyente, the digestive system, integumentary or respiratory system, they can't compensate. All right, they can't stand in place of the work that the kidneys are doing. Kung babalik rin naman po natin yung scenario, if for example, the integumentary system is having difficulties excreting excess ions, or maybe the digestive tract is having difficulties getting rid of excess water or other stuff like that, the kidneys could totally make up for those. The kidneys could just work twice as hard to eliminate all that excess water, excess sodium, excess potassium na hindi ma-eliminate ng ibang organ systems. Alright, so I hope you understood that. For all the other organ systems na may elimination function, kapag nagka-problema yung kidneys, hindi nila kakayanin. Pero if all the other organ systems na may elimination function ay sila yung nagka-problema, okay lang sa kidneys. This illustration right here shows us the components of the urinary system. Aside from eliminating waste and other excess materials, or yung number 1, tignan po natin what are the other functions of the urinary system. Next is the regulation of blood volume and pressure, which correlates to the next one, which is blood solute concentration. So we'll discuss more about that later. And also notice lahat po ng mga susunod na functions ay puro regulation na po. Listed here are the structural components of the urinary system. 2 kidneys with 2 ureters that connect to 1 urinary bladder that has 1 urethra. So, konti lang po, no? Kayang-kaya niyo po yan. This illustration shows us the urinary system as to where it is located in relation to all the other organs in the abdominopelvic region. Let's now talk about the kidneys. The kidneys have been described as a bilateral retroperitoneal organs. So, pag sinabi po nating bilateral, that means that there is 2 of them, right? 1 on each side. Next, retroperitoneal, meaning that it is positioned at the back of the peritoneal cavity. So, nasa likod po. It says here that each kidney weighs approximately 5 ounces or equivalent to a bar of soap. The Americans, no? The Americans will use anything other than the metric system. To be fair though, medyo mas madali nga naman pong maintindihan or magkaroon ng idea if you compare our organs to daily household items. So, ayun po, here are the descriptions regarding our kidney. These next few slides talks about the structures of the kidney or the parts of the kidney. All right, first up is the renal capsule. This is a connective tissue around each kidney. Okay, so may connective tissue daw po na nakabalot sa paligid ng mga kidneys natin, and this would protect the kidneys and act as a barrier. Next is the hilum. The hilum is an indentation. So dito po sa hilum, dito rin po nakalagay or dito rin dumadaan yung renal artery, renal veins, nerves, and the ureter is also connected to the hilum. The renal pelvis would contain the blood vessels and fat. So may mga blood vessels daw po banda dito sa renal sinus. Next, the renal cortex. This is the outer portion and the inner portion is referred to as the renal medulla. So same din naman po sa iba pang mga organs that we've discussed in the past. Outside, referred to as the cortex. Inside or the middle is referred to as the medulla. The renal pyramid is a cone-shaped structure in the medulla whose bases would project into the cortex. Alright, so ang positioning daw po ng renal pyramid, makikita natin to sa medulla ng kidney. After that, yung base or yung malapad na side, nakaharap siya or nakadireksyon siya papunta dun sa cortex. Now, imagining a cone, there's one side that is wide, tas may isang side na medyo mas pointy. Diba po? So, yung side na malapad or yun nga, yung base, nandun daw banda sa cortex. Meaning, na yung pointy na area na to, no, this is projecting to the other side. So, that would be referred to as the renal papillae. So, the renal papillae are the tips of the cone or the tip of the pyramids, and they would drain into calyces. Okay, so ulitin natin. We have what is known as the renal pyramid. The base is facing the cortex. The tip is facing towards the calyces. And yung dulo po, no, yung renal papillae, that would be the tip of the cones or the tip of the pyramids. Next is the renal pelvis. This is where all the calyces would join together and then they would form the structure that leads to the ureter. Alright, ulitin po natin, no. Again, within the renal medulla, we have these cone-shaped or pyramid-shaped structures. Yung base ng cone, nakaharap sa cortex. Yung tip ng cone, nakaharap sa calyces. And the tips of the pyramids or the cones would be referred to as the renal papillae. Alright? So, ayan po. Yung renal pelvis naman po, this is the area kung saan lahat ng calyces doon sila nakaharap. So, this is where the calyces would join together. And after that, this structure would eventually form into the ureter. This illustration right here shows us all these structures that we just talked about in the previous slides. And meron din po tayong actual human sample on this other figure, or here at figure B. Let's now talk about the nephron. So the nephron is the functional unit of the kidney. Okay, ulitin natin. What is the functional unit of the kidney? 1 nephron. So each kidney has over 1 million nephrons. And the nephron includes the renal corpuscle, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. Alright, so on the next slide, tingnan po natin lahat ng parts ng isang nephron. This illustration right here shows us the structure of the nephron. So if we were to cut the kidney and look on the inside, kung halimbawa ito po yung cortex and then dito po yung medulla, alright, or the renal pyramid, no, notice na, ayun nga, yung base ng renal pyramid is nakadireksyon dito sa cortex. Tapos yung tip, nandito na po papunta sa calyx. Again, the calyx together, they would create the ureter. Di ba po? So, tingnan muna natin yung structure ng isang nephron. Alright? So, right here, we have our blood supply. Yung veins and arteries nandito po. Right? Then, here is one renal corpuscle. Now, if we open this up, we would be able to see that on the inside of a renal corpuscle, we have what is known as the Bowman's capsule. Alright, so we have the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. Okay, so ayan, as we can see right here, no, there are two examples that have been shown here. So if titingnan natin ito, andito yung proximal convoluted tubule. Pag sinabi po natin proximal convoluted tubule. Ito yung tubule na malapit dun sa renal corpuscle. Alright? It is in close proximity to the renal corpuscle. After that, this would continue, no? Kaya din siya tinawag na convoluted because it has a lot of twists and curves. Alright? So, magtutuloy-tuloy po yan hanggang sa aabot dito sa loop of Henle. So, the loop of Henle is this structure right here. Parang yung mga elongated U-shaped tubes right here. So, ayan. From the renal corpuscle, we would have the proximal convoluted tubule. Next, we have the descending loop of Henle and then the ascending loop of Henle, which is pataas. And then after that, ang kaduktong na nun is yung distal convoluted tubule. So, yung distal convoluted tubule, as the name implies, no, mas malayo na siya dun sa renal corpuscle. And it is still very convoluted, no? So, ang dami pa rin yung twists and curves. So, ayan, ito po. This is the structure of one nephron. Let's now look into the different types of nephrons. First is the juxtamedullary nephrons. They have very long loops of Henle that extend deep into the medulla. So yung loop of Henle daw po, no, ng mga juxtamedullary nephrons, they're capable of extending further down into the medulla. And these juxtamedullary nephrons are well adapted for water conservation. All right, so ayan po. Maybe we could say na very efficient, no? Very efficient yung water reabsorption dito sa mga juxtamedullary nephrons. Alright, so ayan po. Here are the two main points, no? Or main things that we need to remember about juxtamedullary nephrons. So they have long loops of Henle and they are good for conserving water. Second type of nephron is the cortical nephrons. So these have renal corpuscles that are distributed throughout the cortex and their loops of Henle are shorter. So yun lang naman po yung difference nila, no? Mas maigsi daw po yung loops of Henle ng cortical nephrons. Let's now look further into the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle is the filtration portion of the nephron. Okay, so most of the filtration daw po, no, dito nangyayari sa renal corpuscle. May filtration capabilities yung kidneys natin because of the renal corpuscle. It has two parts, the glomerulus. The glomerulus is a network of capillaries that are twisted around each other, making them look like a ball of yarn. So, ayun po, balikan nyo na lang yung illustration dun sa previous slide kanina, but that's what the glomerulus looks like. It is a kind of like network or a mesh of capillaries. Next is the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule is the enlarged end of the nephron that surrounds the glomerulus. All right. So this one, the Bowman's capsule, this would open into the proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. So kaduktong na daw po ng Bowman's capsule yung proximal convoluted tubule. Inside the Bowman's capsule, it contains podocytes. So podocytes, these are highly specialized epithelial cells that cover the outside of the glomerular capillary. All right, so podocytes, they have a cell body with numerous primary, secondary, and tertiary extensions that are called foot processes. Looking further into the Bowman's capsule, this is actually made up of two layers. The outer layer is composed of simple squamous epithelial cells that eventually become cube-shaped at the beginning of the proximal convoluted tubule. So if you remember from the previous slide, di ba po, sinasabi doon na ang Bowman's capsule ay kaduktong na ng proximal convoluted tubule. So as we can see right here, yung outer layer daw po ng Bowman's capsule, this is made up of simple squamous epithelial cells. Pero habang lumalapit yung structure papunta dun sa proximal convoluted tubule, nagiging cuboidal na daw po yung mga cells. The inner layer is made up of podocytes, which would wrap around the glomerular capillaries. Again, podocytes, they have these foot-like extensions or foot-like structures. Let's now talk about the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole. So the afferent arteriole would supply blood to the glomerulus for filtration. Alright, so galing daw sa afferent arteriole, no, dadaan yung blood flow, tapos i-filter ng glomerulus. Next is the efferent arteriole. So the efferent arteriole would transport the filtered blood away from the glomerulus. Alright? So yung efferent arteriole, para matandaan po natin, no, dito po, e-exit na yung blood na nagpo-flow. Alright? So, afferent entrance, efferent exit. Okay? So, ayan po. Efferent arteriole has smaller diameter than the afferent arteriole, creating a high pressure in the capillaries. So, kapag may high pressure, medyo mas effective po yung filtration. Alright, so again, afferent arterioles, nagsusupply ng blood. Mag-e-enter pa lang po yung blood. Alright, next, after nito, dadaan sa efferent arteriole, na filter na yung blood. Alright, so e-exit na po, no? Efferent arteriole, the blood would now exit. The structures in the renal corpuscle would create the filtration membrane. The filtrate is the fluid that has been filtered from the glomerular capillaries. So this enters the lumen inside of the Bowman's capsule. Okay, so again, yung filtered fluid po, no, from the blood flow that has gone through the renal corpuscle, we would refer to that as the filtrate. All right, so all the structures that we've previously talked about, no, those are the components of the corpuscle, which creates a filtration membrane. Let's now talk about the juxtaglomerular apparatus. The juxtaglomerular apparatus, these are specialized cells of the afferent arteriole. Again, ano po yung afferent arteriole? This is where blood would enter, diba? So, papasok pa lang yung blood flow dun sa glomerulus for it to be filtered. Alright, so again, kapag sinabing juxtaglomerular apparatus, these are the specialized cells of the afferent arteriole. Next are juxtaglomerular cells. So juxtaglomerular cells, these are smooth muscle cells that are located where the afferent arteriole would enter the renal corpuscle. Okay, so again, juxtaglomerular cells, they're basically just smooth muscle cells. Next is the macula densa. The macula densa is the part of the distal convoluted tubule that lies between the afferent and afferent arterioles, all right? Afferent and efferent arterioles next to the renal corpuscle. Okay, ulitin po natin. The macula densa is just a segment or a part of the distal convoluted tubule. It's just that it is located between the afferent and efferent arterioles. The juxtaglomerular apparatus is an important regulatory structure. Secretion of the enzyme renin by the juxtaglomerular apparatus plays an important role in the regulation of filtrate formation and blood pressure. Alright, so ayun po, may enzyme daw po na sinesecrete ang juxtaglomerular apparatus. This enzyme is called renin. So renin is capable of controlling or regulating two things. Renin could regulate filtrate formation or yung fluid na eventually magiging urine, and it could also regulate blood pressure. Right? So again, ulitin po natin, the juxtaglomerular apparatus produces an enzyme called renin. Renin is capable of regulating filtrate formation and blood pressure. The proximal convoluted tubule is where the filtrate first passes. Alright, so after daw pong ma-filter ng blood, no, galing sa glomerulus, yung filtrate, no, dito unang dadaan sa proximal convoluted tubule. So again, kaya siya tinawag na proximal kasi po, mas malapit siya dun sa renal corpuscle, di ba po? So up next, ang next segment po, pagdaan sa proximal convoluted tubule is the loop of Henle. So, tulad nung nakita natin kanina dun sa illustration, it has a descending, yung pababa, and ascending loops, or yung mga pataas na loops. So, water and solutes would pass through the thin walls by diffusion. So, dito daw po sa loop of Henle, madali lang na mag-diffuse yung water and solutes as needed. So kung kailangan excrete, dadaan ito. Kung kailangan reabsorb, kaya rin pong mag-diffuse nito just as easily. Again, these things could happen at the loop of Henle. Next, the filtrate would now go through the distal convoluted tubule. So ulitin po natin yung process na nangyari kanina, no? Once blood passes through the renal corpuscle, mafi-filter siya doon sa loob ng glomerulus. Now, yung filtrate, no, yung fluid po na dumaan na doon sa filtration process, pupunta siya sa proximal convoluted tubule. After that, pupunta siya dun sa loop of Henle, and then pagdating dun sa distal convoluted tubule, no, pupunta na siya sa collecting duct. So parang tuloy-tuloy lang po, pasa-pasa lang, or kumbaga dadaan lang siya dun sa magkakaibang mga structure hanggang umabot sa collecting duct. So this would empty into the calyces. And again, the calyces would eventually kind of like continue onto the structure that would be the ureters. This slide lists down the step-by-step flow of filtrate or yung magiging urine through the nephron. Alright, so again, if our nephrons are right here and the arterioles that would supply blood are right here, no? Ayan po, we have the afferent and the efferent arteriole, di ba po? So pag enter ng blood through the afferent arteriole, no, i-filter siya ng renal corpuscle right here sa glomerulus. Now, the rest of the blood would exit through the efferent arteriole. Meanwhile, yung filtrate naman po, tutuloy siya papunta sa proximal convoluted tubule. After that, this would go through the descending loop of Henle, and then paangat naman papunta dun sa ascending loop of Henle, and then after that, it would go through the distal convoluted tubule. Again, they have the name proximal and distal with regards to their vicinity or closeness to the renal corpuscle. So, yung proximal, mas malapit siya dun sa renal corpuscle. Yung distal, no, mas distant siya dun sa renal corpuscle. So, pagdating po sa distal convoluted tubule, tutuloy-tuloy na po yan dito hanggang sa collecting duct, which is right here. Pagdating sa collecting ducts, this would now proceed to the calyx. So, nandito sa calyx, no, we also have a structure that is referred to as the papillary duct. Anyway, ang ending po, lahat sila ay papunta dito sa calyx. Let's now talk about urine formation. So, there are three processes para po makreate ang urine. First is filtration. So this would occur in the renal corpuscle, and the blood plasma would leave the glomerulus and enter the Bowman space. Alright, so again, filtration. This would mostly occur at the renal corpuscle. Next is tubular reabsorption. So this involves removing substances from the filtrate and placing them back into the blood. Alright, so kung halimbawa, dun sa filtrate, masyadong maraming na filter out na sodium, for example. Now, kung mababa yung sodium levels in the body, no, i-reabsorb po yung ibang mga sodium and isosoli sila dun sa blood circulation. Alright, so that's an example of how tubular reabsorption would happen. Next process is secretion. In secretion, this would involve taking substances from the blood at the nephron area other than the renal corpuscle and putting it back into the nephron tubule. So ayan po, here are the three processes involved in urine formation: filtration, tubular reabsorption, and secretion. This illustration right here shows us where those three processes would happen. So right here, dito po sa renal corpuscle, this is where filtration would happen. Next, at the proximal convoluted tubule and at the loop of Henle, that is where most of the reabsorption would happen. So again, if may mga materials po na na-filter out dito sa renal corpuscle, i-reabsorb nila dito sa proximal convoluted tubule and loop of Henle. After that, the filtrate would pass through and proceed to the distal convoluted tubule. So dito naman po, yung third step na, which is secretion. So most of the things that would pass through here is ready na to be excreted or to become urine. Let's discuss more about filtration. So filtration, this is the movement of water, ions, and small molecules through the filtration membrane into the Bowman's capsule. Alright, so lulusot daw sila dun sa filtration membrane, tas may ipon muna sila dun sa Bowman's capsule. Now, approximately 180 liters of filtrate are produced by the nephrons each day. Alright, so yung mga nephrons na meron sa kidneys natin, together, they could produce approximately 180 liters of filtrate. Of course, not all of those filtrate would be secreted or become urine. So as we can see right here, 1% of the filtrate or 1.8 liters would become urine and the rest is reabsorbed. Alright? So hindi naman po lahat ng 180 liters na yun, no, is urinated. Rather, no, only 1% would become urine or approximately 1.8 liters. Only small molecules are able to pass through the filtration membrane, alright, such as ions. Okay, so hindi po kasya dun sa filtration membrane yung mga malalaking substances like glucose or proteins. Okay, so hindi sila basta-basta mahahanap sa urine because they are too large to pass through the filtration membrane. So the formation of filtrate depends on the filtration pressure. Filtration pressure would force the fluid across the filtration membrane. Alright, so that's the basic concept of filtration. There needs to be some form of pressure para yung fluid po ay dumaan from one side to the other. The filtration pressure is influenced by blood and interstitial fluid pressures as well as osmotic pressures of the plasma and interstitial fluid. Alright, so again, take note of the things that could influence filtration pressure. So, blood pressure, interstitial fluid pressure, and osmotic pressure. Yung tatlong yun po, no, together, they could be factored in with the filtration pressure. Let's now talk more about reabsorption. So 99% of the filtrate is reabsorbed and it would re-enter the circulation. The proximal convoluted tubule is the primary site for reabsorption of solutes and water, right? So solutes like, again, sodium chloride and other ions, and of course, water, dito daw po sila na reabsorb pabalik sa proximal convoluted tubule. The descending loop of Henle concentrates the filtrate, and reabsorption of water and solutes from the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct is controlled by hormones. Okay, so there may be hormones out there, no, na kaya rin po nilang impluensyahan yung pag-reabsorb or pag-secrete natin ng substances with the help of our kidneys. Let's now proceed to discuss secretion. So tubular secretion removes some substances from the blood. Alright? So pagdating po dun sa secretion process or pag lumagpas na ng distal convoluted tubule, yung filtrate, ayun nga po, ito yung mga liquid materials na ready nang maging urine, ready na silang i-urinate. Alright, so these substances include byproducts of metabolism that become toxic in high concentrations and drugs or other molecules that are not normally produced by the body. So maliban po sa mga byproducts of metabolism, no, excess things like medications or vitamins, no, kaya rin po silang i-filter out ng kidneys natin and isi-secrete na lang din po sila. Kaya po, di ba, we have kind of like a daily dose of kind of like a limit for vitamins, alright? So, kailangan ganito number of milligrams lang per day. So, ayun po, kapag nag-exceed tayo sa ganong milligrams per day, for example, for vitamins, yung excess na hindi na kailangan ng katawan natin, isinesekrete din po ng kidneys. Still on secretion, ammonia secretion is passive, alright? Normal or automatic daw po na kapag may ammonia sa blood, ise-secrete ito. Next, secretion of hydrogen, potassium, creatinine, histamine, and penicillin is by active transport. So, gagamit pa daw po ng energy para ma-secrete ang hydrogen, potassium, creatinine, histamine, and penicillin. The kidneys regulate blood composition and are able to produce either very diluted or very concentrated urine to maintain the extracellular fluid concentration that is close to approximately 300 milliosmoles per liter. Okay? So ano pong ibig sabihin ng statement na to? Ang normal, no, ang normal fluid concentration daw po natin extracellularly is at 300 milliosmoles per liter. Okay? So kapag masyadong mataas or masyadong mababa naman ito, yung kidneys po ay magtatrabaho sila to create either diluted or concentrated urine. Again, basta ang goal po nito is to maintain the extracellular fluid concentration. In the countercurrent mechanism, fluids in separate structures flow in opposite directions. Okay, so the countercurrent mechanism creates a very high solute concentration in the medulla compared to the cortex, which would be called the medullary concentration gradient. So sa countercurrent mechanism daw po, no? Alright, ulitin po natin, no? Fluids would flow in opposite directions. Magkasalungat daw po yung flow of fluid. Kaya siya tinawag na counter current. So, ang mangyayari daw po, ang kumbaga is parang result nito is that there would be a high solute concentration. Mataas daw po yung amount of particles within the filtrate inside of the medulla. So, this would create some form of medullary concentration gradient. Concentrated ng solutes or concentrated ng particles yung filtrate na nasa medullary area. The descending limb of the loop of Henle is a critical site for water reabsorption. Alright, so may function daw po yung descending loop of Henle for water reabsorption, for conserving water. Alright, so the filtrate leaving the proximal convoluted tubule is further concentrated as it passes through the descending loop of Henle. Paano siya nagiging concentrated? Kasi nire-reabsorb yung water. So, ang dumadami is yung solutes or yung particles. So, the mechanism for this water reabsorption is osmosis. Basically, yung water po yung kumikilos pabalik para ma-reabsorb sila. The descending loop of Henle is highly permeable to water. Alright, so sobrang easy lang daw po na dumaan yung tubig dito sa descending loop of Henle. As filtrate moves through the medulla containing the highly concentrated interstitial fluid, water is reabsorbed out of the nephron by osmosis. After that, water would enter the vasa recta and removes excess water and solutes from the medulla without changing the high concentration of solutes in the medullary interstitial fluid. Next, kung kanina po, yung descending loop of Henle, it would concentrate the urine by absorbing or reabsorbing water, no? Kabaliktaran naman po yung ginagawa ng ascending loop of Henle. So, the ascending loop of Henle would dilute the filtrate by removing solutes. Okay? So, dito naman daw po sa ascending loop of Henle, ang nire-reabsorb nila is yung solutes or yung mga solid particles para medyo maging diluted ulit yung filtrate na dumadaan. So the thin segment of the ascending limb is not permeable to water. Hindi daw basta-basta nakakadaan yung water dito, but this is permeable to solutes. So solutes would diffuse out of the nephron. Now, the permeability of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct would vary upon hormonal control. So kung kanina, automatic na po na permeable to water ang descending loop of Henle, tas dito naman automatic na permeable to solutes ang ascending loop of Henle. Yung distal convoluted tubule daw po and collecting ducts, ito is dependent pa siya upon the control of hormones. There are three major hormonal mechanisms that are involved in regulating urine concentration and volume. First up is the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, or RAAS. So RAAS is a hormone system within the body that is necessary for the regulation of blood pressure and fluid balance. Primarily, it is regulated by the rate of renal blood flow. So it's basically three different hormones working together. Next is the antidiuretic hormone, which we've already talked about in previous discussions, right? So ADH, this would help conserve water in the body. So di ba nga po, antidiuretic hormone is anti sa process ng urination. Okay? And the third one is the atrial natriuretic hormone. Let's now look at the RAAS or renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system and how this works. Step 1, the kidneys, specifically yung juxtaglomerular apparatus ng kidneys, would release the enzyme renin. Okay, so step 1, release renin. Step 2, ang trabaho po ng renin is to take angiotensinogen and convert it to angiotensin 1. Pero hindi pa po functional ang angiotensin 1. Okay? Wala pa pong masyadong pakinabang ang angiotensin 1. So in step 3, the angiotensin converting enzyme would take angiotensin 1 and make it angiotensin 2. So just a recap, anong organ po ang nagpaproduce ng ACE or the angiotensin converting enzyme? Ayan, sige, kalimutan nyo agad. It's at the lungs, alright? The lungs, aside from helping us breathe, no, and collecting oxygen, ang trabaho rin po ng lungs is to produce ACE, or the angiotensin converting enzyme. Again, the angiotensin 1 would be converted by ACE into angiotensin 2. Now, on to step 4. Ayan, functional na po ang angiotensin 2. So, angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction or yung pagliit ng daanan sa mga blood vessels, which would raise blood pressure. Kasi nga po, di ba, mas makitid na yung daanan, mas maliit yung daanan, so mas mag-e-effort yung heart na i-pump or i-push yung blood, and this effort is measured as a raise in blood pressure. Alright, so ayan po. Sana naintindihan po yung RAAS. Again, wag pong malilito no, between angiotensinogen, angiotensin 1, and angiotensin 2. Okay, so if anybody here plays Pokemon, alright, just think of it as that. Okay, so parang evolutions na yun, no? So Squirtle, mag-e-evolve siya into Wartortle, and then yung si Wartortle, mag-e-evolve siya into Blastoise. So parang ganun din po yung concept dito. Angiotensinogen would evolve into angiotensin 1, and then angiotensin 1 would evolve into angiotensin 2. So ayan. Tas ayan. After that, magiging functional na po siya. This illustration right here shows us the actions of aldosterone. So if, for example, we have a decreased blood pressure, ang mangyayari po is the kidneys would secrete the enzyme renin. Alright? So renin would convert angiotensinogen into angiotensin 1. After that, magre-release naman po yung lungs ng ACE or the angiotensin converting enzyme. Yung angiotensin 1 magiging angiotensin 2. Alright? So, ang mangyayari, angiotensin 2 would increase aldosterone secretion. So, kapag tumaas yung aldosterone secretion, there is increased sodium and water reabsorption, which also results in increased blood pressure. So, ayun po. This is how aldosterone would work. Let's now talk about the antidiuretic hormone mechanism. So antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, this is secreted by the posterior pituitary gland, otherwise referred to as the neurohypophysis. So, ang ADH po, na-secrete siya when the solute concentration of the blood or interstitial fluid increases. Alright? Kapag masyadong madami daw po yung amount of solutes, no, in our blood, then we need to have ADH, or we need the action of ADH. Okay? So, ang mangyayari po, ADH would act on the kidneys, causing them to absorb more water to decrease the urine volume. Alright? Absorb more water. So, i-absorb yung water, tas kokonti, no? Bababa yung volume of urine. Kokonti lang po yung fluid na i-urinate ng person. So, the result is to maintain a normal blood volume and blood pressure. So, as we can see right here, no, kapag na-detect daw po ng posterior pituitary gland natin na masyadong mataas yung amount of solutes in our blood, uutusan nito, no, uutusan nito yung kidneys by the help of the ADH. So, gamit yung ADH, no, utusan niya yung kidney na mag-reabsorb ng water. Pag nag-reabsorb yung water, we achieve homeostasis kasi mababalance out yung amount ng fluid and yung amount ng solutes. Right? So, again, that is how the ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, would work with regards to conservation of water, or the reabsorption of water. Again, kapag na-reabsorb yung water, this would decrease urine volume, or kukonti na lang daw po yung fluid na i-urinate ng person. Kasi nga, kinailangan tong i-reabsorb. This usually happens in times kung saan, halimbawa, have you ever experienced when you're eating maybe like French fries or chips or any salty foods, kapag mga pagkain na mataas sa salt content, no? Di ba maya-maya nakakaramdam kayo na nauuhaw na kayo? So yun, isa yun sa mga mechanisms, no, of our brain to tell our body na okay, masyado ng maraming solutes na kino-consume itong person na ito. So we need to do something, no, to kind of like bring back up the amount of fluid in the body. So again, either i-start up ng utak yung thirst mechanism para utusan yung person na uminom ng tubig, or utusan niya yung kidneys by releasing ADH. So gamit yung ADH, sasabihin niya dun sa kidneys to reabsorb water. Right? So that's an example on how we may be able to observe the work of the antidiuretic hormone. Let's now talk about the atrial natriuretic hormone. The atrial natriuretic hormone, or ANH, is secreted from cardiac muscles at the right atrium. So sa heart daw po nanggagaling yung atrial natriuretic hormone. Alright? So again, atrial natriuretic hormone, this is secreted by the cardiac muscles, specifically at the right atrium. Kaya siya tinawag na atrial, diba? So, this is secreted by cardiac muscles, no, from the right atrium when blood pressure increases. Alright, so kapag masyadong mataas daw po yung blood pressure ng isang person, no, mag-work daw po yung heart and it would release atrial natriuretic hormone. Now, anong gagawin ng ANH? ANH acts on the kidneys to decrease sodium reabsorption. So, yung ANH, no, mauutusan niya yung kidney, no, to stop or to decrease yung pag-reabsorb ng sodium ions. Now, sodium ions, they remain in the nephron and then they would enter the urine. So, there is an increased loss of sodium and water to reduce blood volume and blood pressure. Okay, so ang dami na po natin napag-usapan, yung kidneys pa lang po yun. Okay, so let's now proceed to the ureters and urinary bladder. So the ureters, these are small tubes that carry urine from the renal pelvis of the kidney to the bladder. So sa ureters na daw po dadaan yung final filtrate or yung filtrate na ready na para maging urine. So magpa-flow sila doon papunta sa bladder. Next is the urinary bladder. So this is located at the pelvic cavity. Alright, so kung kanina, yung kidneys, retroperitoneal yung location, yung urinary bladder po, nasa pelvic cavity na siya. So this one stores urine. So parang storage site lang muna siya nung urine that has been created. So this can hold a few ml or milliliters to a maximum of 1,000 milliliters of urine. Alright, ulitin natin, an average healthy human adult, no, it could store approximately 1,000 milliliters of urine, or basically that's equivalent to 1 liter, di ba? These illustrations show us a cross-section of the ureters and the urinary bladder. So as we can see right here, no, let's first look into the composition of the ureters. All right, so right here, makikita natin na sa ureters pa lang, present na po yung transitional epithelium. And of course, right here at the urinary bladder, no, meron din ng mga transitional epithelium because the urinary bladder needs to be able to stretch, diba, to hold all of those urine. It also has a smooth muscle layer and an area of connective tissues. Next segment is the urethra. So this one is a tube that exits the bladder. Alright, so nakakonect siya sa bladder and then it would continue to the outside. So this carries urine from the urinary bladder to the outside of the body. It has what is known as the internal urethral sphincter. This is a smooth muscle that surrounds the urethra at the junction of the urinary bladder and prevents urine from leaving the bladder. So bakit daw po hindi basta-basta nagpa-flow out yung urine na nandun sa bladder papunta agad sa labas? So paano naho-hold or nako-collect ng bladder natin yung urine na hindi siya tumatagas agad papunta sa urethra? So that's because of the internal urethral sphincter, which again is a smooth muscle that would kind of close off the junction between the urinary bladder and the urethra. Next is the external urethral sphincter. So kung kanina, internal, ito naman po, external. The external urethral sphincter is made up of skeletal muscles surrounding the urethra near the pelvic floor or towards the end. So this allows a person to voluntarily start or stop the flow of urine. Okay, so kung kanina, yung internal urethral sphincter, kumbaga is gawa siya sa smooth muscles, tapos nandun siya located sa pagitan ng urinary bladder and yung, kumbaga is parang entrance papunta dun sa urethra. Pero itong external urethral sphincter na to, as the name implies, no, it is already near the outside or near the pelvic floor. Alright? And kung yung internal urethral sphincter is made of smooth muscles, so basically involuntarily ang control dito, yung external urethral sphincter naman po, this is made up of skeletal muscles, meaning we could control this voluntarily. So we have conscious voluntary control to start or stop the flow of urine when a person is urinating. What is the micturition reflex? The micturition reflex is activated by the stretch of the urinary bladder wall. So, di pa po, yung urinary bladder, it could hold certain amounts of urine. So, it has the capability to stretch dahil gawa nga siya sa transitional epithelium, di ba po? So, when the urinary bladder is fully stretched, alright, yung ibig sabihin ay puno na siya, no? So action potentials are conducted from the bladder to the spinal cord through the pelvic nerves. Okay? So basically, madidetect daw po ng brain natin or magsasend ng signals, no, yung bladder natin through the spinal cord, no, as it is being stretched. So the parasympathetic action potentials would cause the bladder to contract. Diba? Nakita nyo kanina dun sa cross-section, the walls of our urinary bladder is made up of smooth muscles, right? So when it is fully stretched, it would send a signal to the brain. The brain would give a go signal to the smooth muscles to start contracting. So the stretch of the urinary bladder stimulates sensory neurons to inform the brain that the person needs to urinate. Okay, so ulitin natin yung process na yun. And let's look at the illustration on the next slide. This illustration right here shows us how the micturition reflex works. Again, i-explain na lang natin no, in a very basic way. First up, mapupuno ng urine itong urinary bladder. So, naturally, it would stretch. So, the stretching sends potential actions through the spinal cord papunta sa brain. Alright? So, pagdating po dun sa cerebrum, okay, pagdating dun sa cerebrum natin, ma-realize ng brain na kailangan ng mag-urinate nung person. Alright? So, it would now send signals dun sa smooth muscles nung urinary bladder to contract and release the urine. Let's now talk about the regulation of extracellular fluid composition. This is regulated by two means, through thirst regulation and ion concentration regulation. Let's now talk about thirst regulation. Water intake is controlled by the thirst center that is located in the hypothalamus. Alright, ulitin po natin, no? The sensation of being thirsty and wanting to drink is brought about by the action or decisions of our hypothalamus. Alright, so when the concentration of ions in the blood increases, it stimulates the thirst center to cause thirst. Alright, so ulitin po natin, kapag masyado daw pong mataas yung ions in our blood circulation, this would stimulate or trigger the thirst center in our hypothalamus to tell the person to drink water, basically. Alright, so again, gamitin po nating example, no, yung sinabi ko kanina about eating very salty foods, alright? So, very salty foods contain a lot of sodium chloride, di ba po? So, pag tumaas masyado yung level of sodium chloride in our circulation, ayan po, madidetect ito ng hypothalamus natin to, ayun nga po, to cause a person to be thirsty, to tell a person to drink water. So when water is consumed, the concentration of blood ions would decrease or go back to normal. And due to this dilution effect, no, this causes the sensation of thirst to decrease. So basically, the thirst has been quenched after a person drinks water, right? So again, the thirst center is located at our hypothalamus. The thirst center is activated when concentration of ions is increased. Let's now talk about the regulation of acid-base balance. The respiratory system is actually involved in acid-base regulation. So this responds rapidly to the changes in pH. Okay? So increased respiratory rate raises the blood pH, making it more alkaline. So there would be increased rate of carbon dioxide elimination. Right? Now, reduced respiratory rate reduces the pH. Now, it would become more acidic because there is decreased rate of carbon dioxide elimination. Alright? So, basically, yung pH po ng blood natin is naaayon sa carbon dioxide levels. Less carbon dioxide, more alkaline. Mas konti na carbon dioxide, more acidic. Right? So, increased respiratory rate or mas madalas or mas mabilis na paghinga ng isang person, mas mabilis din yung pag-eliminate ng carbon dioxide. Now, on the other hand, kung babagalan natin or babawasan natin yung respiratory rate, medyo mas bagal din yung pag-eliminate ng carbon dioxide. So again, if there is less carbon dioxide, no, there is increased rate of carbon dioxide elimination, alright, kumonti na yung carbon dioxide, then magiging alkaline yung blood pH. If there is decreased rate of carbon dioxide elimination, meaning naiipon dito yung carbon dioxide, magiging acidic yung blood pH. Let's now look into the involvement of the kidneys regarding acid-base balance. So the nephrons would secrete hydrogen into the urine to regulate pH of body fluids or directly regulate pH of body fluids. So kung kanina, sa involvement ng lungs, yung carbon dioxide yung ina-adjust niya to control the pH of the blood. Dito naman po yung kidneys, yung mismong hydrogen ions yung ina-adjust niya to regulate the pH of body fluids. The more hydrogen secretion if pH is decreasing. So kapag naging acidic na daw po yung environment, ang nangyayari is more hydrogen is being secreted or eliminated. Next, there would be less hydrogen secretion if the pH is increasing. So kapag nagiging alkaline na daw po yung body condition natin, yung body fluids natin, then babawasan na ng kidneys yung pag-eliminate sa hydrogen. Let's now talk about acidosis and alkalosis. Acidosis occurs when the pH of the blood falls below 7.35. So 7.35 po yung normal, diba? Slightly alkaline. Alright? So acidosis is below 7.35. So we have two kind of like forms of acidosis: respiratory acidosis and metabolic acidosis. In respiratory acidosis, the respiratory system is unable to eliminate carbon dioxide. So ayun po, naaayon naman po sa pangalan yung events na nangyayari. In respiratory acidosis, the respiratory system is failing to eliminate carbon dioxide. So pag naipon yung carbon dioxide, magkakaroon ng respiratory acidosis. Next, in metabolic acidosis, there is excess production of acidic substances such as lactic acids or ketones due to increased metabolism or the decreased ability of the kidneys to eliminate hydrogen. Alright, so there are two ways kung paano nagkakaroon ng metabolic acidosis ang isang pasyente. Either nag-increase yung metabolism niya or nag-decrease yung pag-eliminate ng kidneys ng hydrogen ions. Let's now talk about alkalosis. Alkalosis occurs when the pH of the blood rises or increases above 7.45. Okay? So kapag mas mataas na daw po sa 7.45, masyado na daw alkaline yung blood pH. Again, may respiratory and metabolic versions ito. In respiratory alkalosis, this is a result of hyperventilation that results in low carbon dioxide concentration. Alright, so kapag sobrang baba naman daw po nung amounts of carbon dioxide, no, ang mangyayari is there is respiratory alkalosis. Next, in metabolic alkalosis, this results in the rapid elimination of hydrogen ions from the body, resulting from severe vomiting or when there is excess aldosterone that is being secreted by the adrenal cortex. Alright, so ulitin natin, may dalawang ways daw po kung paano nagkakaroon ng metabolic alkalosis ang isang pasyente. Either the person is severely vomiting or there is excessive aldosterone production. Either way, parehas ang resulta nila. Ang resulta nila is rapid elimination of hydrogen. These illustrations right here shows us the signs and symptoms of a patient suffering from metabolic acidosis and if a person is suffering from respiratory acidosis. And ito rin po, may signs and symptoms din po of a person that is suffering from respiratory alkalosis versus a person that is suffering from metabolic alkalosis. So ayan po, I highly suggest that you study these photos para if ever may mga questions po sa upcoming exams na medyo situational or parang case study, at least aware po kayo no, ng mga signs and symptoms na pwede nyong ma-observe. Again, here are different examples of people who are suffering from metabolic or respiratory acidosis and respiratory and metabolic alkalosis. Again, kapag sinabi nating respiratory, ang acidosis or alkalosis, it has something to do with the function of the lungs. Pero kapag sinabing metabolic acidosis, no, it has something to do either with our metabolism or the work of our kidneys. If you belong to my lecture classes, that ends our discussion on the urinary system. Thank you so much for listening. If you belong to my laboratory classes, let's now proceed and view some microscopic anatomy samples on the urinary system. This photo right here shows us the kidney under low power objective. Ang pinaka-notable observation na pwede nating makita dito is the amount of renal corpuscles that we're seeing. So ito, yung mga structures po na to, no, these circular structures that kind of like have a white space around them, these are the renal corpuscles. So, dyan natin pwedeng makita yung Bowman space, yung glomerulus, alright? So, again, low power objective lang naman po ito. That's why we're not really seeing specific details. So, again, these things right here, these circular structures right here, these are the renal corpuscles. Naka-point out din po kung alin dito yung blood vessels. As we can see right here, yung area po kung saan nakakoncentrate yung mga renal corpuscles, this is most likely the cortex. Alright? Or definitely, no, sorry for the word, this is definitely the cortex kapag nakita nyo na maraming renal corpuscles. And then, kapag nandito sa area na to, this is the renal medulla. This slide shows the renal cortex under high power objective. So ayan, medyo mas nakikita na po natin, no, yung clusters or yung mga renal corpuscles, no. Medyo madami talaga sila, mas nakakoncentrate sila dito sa renal cortex. Alright, ulitin natin, no. Almost all renal corpuscles could be observed at the renal cortex or yung outer portion ng kidneys. This slide shows us the renal medulla under high power objective. So as we can see right here, wala na tayong nakikita na renal corpuscles, but we're seeing a lot of circular structures with holes inside of them. So these are most likely the tubules, diba? Either the ascending or descending loops of Henle, maaaring nandito yung mga ibang portions ng convoluted tubules, alright? But again, ayan po, this is what it looks like if we're looking at the renal medulla, no? So it's less likely na may makikita pa po tayo na renal corpuscles. Again, the renal corpuscles could be found at the renal cortex. This slide shows us a low-power objective view of the renal pelvis. So dito po, since LPO lang po ito, no, very generalized yung view na nakikita natin. So we're seeing a few fat cells, we're seeing some transitional epithelium, and then right here we're seeing the collecting ducts. So yung mga structures na to that look like they kind of have spaces in the middle, these are the collecting ducts. So kapag puro ganito po yung nakikita nyo, tas sa kabilang side, fat cells, no, this is most likely the renal pelvis. Alright, ulitin natin. Kung i-compare dun sa renal medulla, yung renal medulla kasi parang puro mga openings ng tubules yung nakikita natin, diba? Dito po sa renal pelvis, we're seeing the openings of the collecting ducts and also some fat cells. This slide right here shows us examples of renal corpuscles. So ayan po, nakikita na natin ng mas malinaw, no, yung mga structures on the inside and the Bowman's space. Alright, so on the inside, ang meron po dito ay yung glomerulus. And then yung space sa labas, this is referred to as the Bowman's space. And then all these holes that we're seeing right here, this is the proximal tubules. Let's now take a closer look into the renal corpuscles. So dito po, ayan, mas nakikita na natin yung glomerulus and the glomerular capillaries. Okay, so if you would zoom in on this photo, tignan nyo na lang po dun sa isa-send ko na PDF in the future. As you can see right here, there are areas where we may be able to observe some RBCs. Di ba po? So yung mga tuldok-tuldok na medyo reddish or dark pink yung staining, no? Those are actually RBCs, which makes sense because these are capillaries, diba? So blood is flowing through this and would be filtered, no? So the filtrate will end up right here in the Bowman's space of the Bowman's capsule. Alright? So ayan, right here dito natin makikita yung afferent and efferent arterioles. Magkatabi sila. There's no way for us to distinguish them. Okay? So hindi natin malalaman kung alin dito yung afferent or efferent kasi magkahawig lang po sila. Pero ang tatandaan natin is yung function nila. Alright? So sa afferent arterioles, this is the place where the blood would first enter. So papasok pa lang sila sa afferent. Next, pagdating ng efferent, no, na-filter na po yung blood, so it's time to exit, all right, through the efferent arterioles. All right, so this entire thing right here is referred to as the renal corpuscle. This slide right here shows us the structure of a ureter upon cross-section. So, ayan po, meron din siyang outermost or adventitia. The inside is made up of smooth muscles, and the inside right here, ito po yung lumen, yung space, okay, yung space, yun po yung lumen, and then the actual innermost layer, no, is made up of transitional epithelium. So, sa ureter pa lang po, meron ng transitional epithelium. Alright? So, wag po yung kakalimutan ha. Transitional epithelium is not just found at the urinary bladder. Sa ureter pa lang po, no, meron ng transitional epithelium. So, they're already capable of a bit of stretch. This slide right here shows us the ureters under high power objective. So dito po, mas nakikita na natin yung transitional epithelium. Notice that some of them are cuboidal and then some of them are starting to look a bit squamous. Alright, so ito po, this layer right here, yung innermost, this is the transitional epithelium. Right here, we have some connective tissues. No, we would refer to this as the lamina propria. Alright, again, we would refer to this as the lamina propria. And then right here, dito na po tayo makakita ng smooth muscles. Again, smooth muscles are not striated, diba? Tapos they have tapered ends or medyo patusok po yung magkabilang dulo nila. So that's what we're seeing right here. These pink squiggly lines, these are the smooth muscles. This slide right here shows us an illustration and a microscopic sample of the urinary bladder. So basically, the same din naman po yung structure, no? There is an area with smooth muscles, there's an area of connective tissues, and then the innermost layer, no? Yung area kung saan hinohold muna sandali yung urine. This is made up of transitional epithelium. Here's a better picture of the urinary bladder. Again, right here we have smooth muscles, connective tissues, and transitional epithelium. Ayan po. So, nag-insert lang naman po ako ng magkakaibang pictures or magkakaibang itsura ng urinary bladder. But basically, the composition is the same. There's an area na puro smooth muscles. There is an area for connective tissues. And there's an area kung saan andito sa pinaka-inside is puro transitional epithelium. So, this darkly staining area right here, no, these are the transitional epithelium. Yung light staining areas, most likely, these are the connective tissues, and then these ones right here are the smooth muscles. This slide right here shows us what transitional epithelium would look like when they are stretched or not stretched, as we can see right here in this example. So dito po sa unang picture, no, it's showing us that the transitional epithelium is not stretched. So hindi pa po puno ng urine yung urinary bladder ng person na ito. Alright? So, they are very cuboidal. Alright? Lahat sila cuboidal yung itsura. Now, if we were to stretch out the transitional epithelium in cases kung saan puno na ng urine yung urinary bladder, then magpa-flatten na po karamihan dun sa mga transitional epithelium. Alright? Notice, no, a lot of the cells here at the top, they're flattened. So they have become squamous in appearance. This slide right here shows us an example of the urethra. So I think by now medyo naintindihan nyo na po, no, yung basic structure nila. Alright, so right here we have a ring of smooth muscles. Okay, the next, connective tissues bago mag-transitional epithelium ulit. Okay, so may transitional epithelium po ulit ang urethra. So these darkly staining areas right here, no, yan po yung mga cells of the transitional epithelium. Again, when they are not stretched, they are cuboidal. When they're stretched out, they may appear squamous. That ends our discussion on the urinary system. This has been Aurel Enriquez. Thank you so much for listening.